What's going on YouTube? It's Teej back again with another video. Today we're busting out another 2-round 2025 NFL mock draft. Been a couple weeks since our last mock, so excited to talk about some new names, a little bit of risers, a little bit of fallers, and of course I want to hear your thoughts on who your favorite team is, and did you like the haul that I gave your squad, as well as of course chime in. Let me know who goes too high, who goes too low. Just for reference, I normally do this, after the Thursday night games, before, the weekend slate, but I am actually doing this before Thursday night as well, just in case I say something, lunacy, after, Vikings or Rams pick in this one, that then gets, pretty rough look after Thursday night football. Just want to make that note, make it clear that I'm doing this before week 8 even kicks off. But let's go ahead and kick things off with the New England Patriots going Travis Hunter. Simply put, if it's not a quarterback at 1, I just think the value Travis Hunter brings to you, he's got to be the number 1 overall pick for New England. We're trying to figure out Jalen Polk. Haven't seen a lot of Javon Baker, so still trying to figure out that receiver room. I think Hunter would be your full-time corner 2, which I love the idea of him and Christian Gonzalez, but then using him as the difference maker. Gotta have it in the goal line, things like that. He's a really fun player to add into the mix, and I'm feeling pretty good about Drake May. So again, to the point, it's not quarterback at 1. I think Travis Hunter should be the pick. All right, to the Carolina Panthers, we're gonna have a couple quarterbacks come off the board. I'm back and forth on both these guys. Cam Ward, and the next pick's gonna be Shedeur Sanders, but I like them both a ton. Cam Ward, man, such a live arm. I know he may make some mistakes that, rub people the wrong way, but, I have, Jordan Love was someone I had a first-round grade on. Josh Allen was my number 1 player in 2018. I like these toolsy, traitsy types, and I'm willing to, live with some of those head-scratching type of plays if it brings about those big chunk plays that are rare and only a handful of guys really at the next level can do. I think Cam Ward's got the arm talent to do that. He's becoming more and more comfortable with his pass catcher. Has been super accurate, and we're seeing him be able to, just ratchet up velocity, gotta have it, power throws without sacrificing any sort of accuracy, especially when, targeting corners of the end zone. We saw it this last week against Louisville in that first touchdown. Oh my gosh. So, and he's got functional athleticism. Honestly, I think he plays like a better athlete than what he'll probably test at. Because of that, you also get that, he broke outside the pocket and he's making something happen off script, or, oh shit, we didn't, account for Ward and now he's tucking and running for 25. And that's kind of where, he's kind of Geno Smith plus a few more arm angles. He's like Geno mixed with, Matt Stafford, which that's a really fun combination. And, we'll see what happens with Bryce Young this upcoming weekend. He is going to be starting for Andy Dalton. Maybe that changes the direction the Panthers go, but for what we have right now, I think quarterback's got to be the top priority next offseason. As previously alluded to, Shedeur Sanders is going to be the pick here at 3. Not to condone fans booing a guy who may or may not, if you ask me, probably did play his last NFL snap. I don't really endorse that. It's more so hey, you guys can cheer on DTR, cheer on the backup as they come out. But I'll have to say, I think that just kind of shows the frustration in and around that fan base with Deshaun Watson. And I know it's a lot of money still guaranteed to Watson. Maybe the injury gets them out of that. I don't know. Not my specialty. But what I do know is this team needs an upgraded quarterback. And if you're going to pay all that money, you got to do it with a rookie contract. Get that cheap window. I don't know if this is a sexy place that Dion would let his kid go. I don't know if that's going to actually be a thing. So I'm just kind of noting it just for the sake of noting it. But I think his ability to play with timing, his accuracy, and this, now it's Ken Dorsey calling plays, but still Dorsey, Stefanski, this kind of zone, pass heavy attack, play action, get guys in motion. I think he fits either one of those two guys. And ultimately they're loosely kind of tangentially related. They're like cousins almost. So I think he's a great fit for the offense. Got to figure out receiver now with no Amari Cooper, but as a dynasty owner of Cedric Tillman, here we go. Hopefully this is his breakout season, and hopefully he's wide receiver 1 for Shedeur Sanders next year. Anyway, speaking of wide receiver 1s, let's give the Tennessee Titans one post D-Hop trade, and it just hasn't, Kevin really just ultimately hasn't played up to what his contract stipulates he's worth. And maybe that changes over the course of the season. Maybe he plays up to that price point. If he does, I still think this team needs a number 2 receiver then, or at least a 1B, right? Nick Millen, Ridley, 2 very different skill sets. I just love the yards after catch ability, whether it's Will Levis or someone else that they go and get free agency. Hey, maybe Kirk Cousins is, done after a year in Atlanta. We'll see. Again, a lot of football left to be played. It depends on how eager they are to get to Michael Penix, but something like that could be kind of interesting for Tennessee, and maybe they're just looking for pass catchers or, supporting cast instead of quarterback. So, again, we have a whole second half of this year to play out, a full offseason. Hard to tell what the team's going to do at quarterback, so I am ignoring that for right now. But I love the idea of McMillan plus, Ridley is that number 2 in that offense. Different skill sets, but whoever that quarterback is going to have 2 high-functioning receivers to try to make that job a little easier. Then we get to the Jets. I'm going to go Will Campbell here. Whether it's guard or tackle, I think he's the best offensive lineman in this class. And there's still other guys I really like a ton. Josh Simmons out for the year. We'll talk about him later on. Still a big Kelvin Banks guy. But again, we'll see what the arm length measurements are. At this time last year, everyone was trying to tell me that Talisa Fuonga was going to be a guard. Maybe you think his play style matches that, but the arm length checked out to play tackle. He had longer arms than Joe Alt. So, I'm taking everything I'm hearing about his arm length with a grain of salt. It does look a little stubby, but I also think he plays with a lot of power, that he's kind of got that Joe Alt build where it's like the arms are a little shorter than you would expect, but he has an abundance of power and good enough technique to kind of just play through that. And here for Campbell, it's either, flip to right tackle, or you make Olu Fashanu, who's kind of cross-training right now, left and right tackle. You make him make the flip to the right side. Campbell becomes your left tackle. I also think there's a possibility. I don't think you would do that here with the 5th overall pick. Take a guard. It'd have to be like a Zach Martin level of like guarantee, Quentin Nelson level of guarantee. This dude's going to be a dude. But you could also play Will Campbell at guard and have Elijah Vera-Tucker play some right tackle. He has done that for the Jets, so a lot of flexibility here. And it's just kind of one of those spots where, like, whether you think Campbell's a guard or a tackle, there's an avenue in which I think the Jets can shuffle it around and get their best 5 on the field. And ultimately, I do think one more offensive lineman would go a long way for that unit. Again, barring we don't know what happens with Aaron Rodgers, we'll see how the rest of this year plays out. Maybe it'll scare him off and into retirement, into a permanent, darkness retreat post-football career. But let's just say he goes back for another year. Let's get him one more offensive lineman. Then we get to the New Orleans Saints here at 6. Hey, man, I've been trying to tell y'all, I think Abdul Carter, and the last 3 weeks, he's turned a corner. Pass rush win rate, getting up and up over 20% more and more frequently. You're seeing the power. You're seeing the athleticism. The hand placement's getting better. The move set's starting to become a little bit more diverse. And ultimately, like Cam Jordan's been disappointing. Peyton Turner, Isaiah Foskey. I'm continuing to name off these guys that aren't, Carl Granderson for this Saints defensive line. And it's a 1-year deal for Chase Young. They could bring him back. They could also just look to replace him and get a guy with 5 years, including the 5th year option of cheap contract control. So I think that's the direction they'd opt towards. So Abdul Carter over the New Orleans Saints. Pick number 7, Jacksonville Jaguars. I went back and forth between Mason Graham and Will Johnson. Ultimately, we're going to give him interior defensive line in the 2nd round. We'll go Will Johnson here at 7. He's definitely better than any of the corners you would have had in the 2nd round. I know he's been playing a little banged up. I know it hasn't been like Charles Woodson level of like last season at Michigan, but he's still, to me, cornerback 1 in this class. Look at last year's tape. Look at the high moments of this year. 2 pick sixes. He's going to be okay. And honestly, I could see him ultimately being a guy who, like, towards the end of the season, if Michigan goes the way it has been the last couple of weeks, he could probably opt out of the last couple of games in the bowl and then just, get ready for his NFL future. But to me, still CB1. Let's get Ronald Darby out of that corner 2 spot. Johnson plus Tyson Campbell. Love that as a 1-2 punch on the outside. Could also use some work in that safety room in Jacksonville. We get to the Raiders and the Giants. And I'm going to do something that I honestly wasn't planning on doing. I was actually going to have these 2 teams go quarterback back-to-back in the 2nd round. But as I went through this exercise and, I just passed QB needy team after QB needy team after QB needy team the rest of the way, the QB tax might still put these guys somewhere in the top 10. So with the 8th overall pick, I'm going to have Jalen Milroe become a Vegas Raider. If Luke Getsy's around, I could see him being, the type of archetype that he wants. I could also see where Justin Fields scare him off of that. Let's be more frank here. Luke Getsy is not going to be back as the OC next year for the Raiders. But given, obviously there's a connection with Antonio Pierce, Jaden Daniels from their time at Arizona State. I wonder, since he can't get that connection, could he still cover that play style for a guy that wants to, pound the rock, win with defense, control the time of possession? I do wonder if the athleticism of Milroe makes him a little alluring there. And then, he's got plenty of deep shot, long ball upside, great arm, really nice touch on that deep ball too. It's just kind of the mundane stuff that we're still trying to clean up. There's a couple of intermediate throws from the Vanderbilt game. Jordan Reed tweeted them out. They're pretty good. Last week, I think, was another step back though, however. So been disappointed the last 2 weeks for Milroe. But the athletic upside still probably puts him somewhere in round 1, unless the rest of this year is just totally disastrous, and then he decides to go back to Alabama, which I'm totally fine with if he does decide to do that. So then the next, kind of quarterback I didn't really want to do this with, I would have preferred, again, I was going to have these guys go back-to-back, 39 and 40, whatever the 2nd-round picks are, because ultimately I think that's kind of where they're at. The last couple of weeks being disappointing, 2 weeks for Milroe. The Texas game was not great for Carson Beck. But ultimately, there is a quarterback tax, and as I went through the rest of the first round exercise, I passed a lot of quarterback needy teams, and I'm like, actually, would they go quarterback here if these guys are available? So I had to pivot, and ultimately 4 quarterbacks in the top 10. I don't think that happens right now, but a lot of time left until we get to April. But for Carson Beck, before that Texas game, it was a slow first start, first half against Bama, but then second half against Bama, the next 2 weeks, he looked lights out. And the ball placement was great. The throw power was there. Functional athleticism, actually a little bit more than probably someone like a Cam Ward, who I described as a functional athlete. But ultimately, that Texas game was a massive disappointment, and that comes against a lot of NFL competition. So still a lot to be figured out with Carson Beck. And maybe the Giants then become a right spot because you get into a place that, sounds like they're going to keep Brian Daboll around. I love the idea of that. No matter the results the rest of the season, I think he's a good offensive mind, good guy to have working with a young quarterback. I would like that Beck-Daboll relationship. And also, you don't have to force Carson Beck on the field if you get through training camps, OTAs, all that stuff, and you're like, yeah, he's not there yet. Daniel's still the better quarterback for right now. So maybe that little bit of a leeway makes Carson Beck that much better as a pro. But I get it. I know a lot of people are going to be like, no way after that Texas game he goes top 10. I hear you. It wasn't pretty, but QB tax, most coveted position in all sports. He does have tools. I can still see where he goes. Somewhere in the first round, that being said, 9 does feel a little rich. I have no trades in this mock. Just didn't feel like dealing with all the headaches and all the negative comments for that. All right, anyways, let's get on to the 10th overall pick. Miami Dolphins, congratulations. You're today's lottery winner of collecting the Mason Graham falling ticket. This would be a slam dunk. I like Zach Sealer. I like Calais Campbell. But this is like how you replace Christian Wilkins with a blue chip, to me, still one of maybe the best player in this draft class. I don't know. He was my preseason number 1 guy. We'll see. I'm kind of waiting to do that final eval and put a stamp on it. But he was my preseason number 1 guy. And I think him as that middle disruptor between Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips, Chop Robinson, sign me up for that. And I think actually he would make Zach Sealer that much better of a player. Then we get to the Los Angeles Rams here at 11. And with the Cooper Kupp trade swirling right now, I do think he ultimately does get dealt. I think the Rams are really savvy, and they've kind of become... We used to talk about New England like this. I think the Rams are now kind of that team. They'd rather be a year early getting rid of you than a year late. I think that's going to lead to Cooper Kupp being dealt at the deadline. But I mean, barring a win on Thursday night, maybe they're like, hey, you know what, we can get back in the playoff race. Maybe they don't, but I think they'll lose the Vikings. Again, knock on wood, doing this before the game. And I do think they're going to trade Kupp. Luther Burton's a really interesting skill set to have in there because, like, yards after the catch, solid underneath route runner, but then also you get the long speed and the big playability. Could it be a blend of, like, doing what Cooper Kupp does in this offense, but also, like, being a downfield threat like they used to Atwell? Like, I wonder if he could be a mesh between those two different types of receivers. But ultimately, like, I would just trust Sean McVay to be like, hey, I got this awesome playmaker. I'm going to figure out how to get him the football because Sean McVay is one of the best in the biz at doing just that. Cincinnati Bengals are up next. I'm going to give them Nick Scorton. Another year of Trey Hendrickson being easily their best defensive lineman, but he's super banged up pretty much week in and week out. That second edge spot I think they can upgrade from. We're going to go interior defensive line later on. I think that D-line is something they're going to have to target on. I know there's other parts of the roster you could certainly focus on, receiver, maybe a secondary position, totally. And I hear you. And, Malachi Starks did come to mind here. But ultimately, I think Nick Scorton plus Trey Hendrickson, that would be a sick tandem. And I think ultimately that could be the quickest level of difference you could bring to this defense. That being said, next mock may well be Malachi Starks here at 12. Arizona Cardinals at 13. I'm going to go Kenneth Grant. Bruce Feldman freaks list. He's had a really solid season. As much as Josiah Stewart, to me, has been kind of like the runaway story of that Michigan defensive line, that's not taking away any credit from Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. They were awesome, high level. Like I said, Mason Graham, preseason number 1 guy for me. Kenneth Grant, preseason, top 3 interior defensive lineman. I believe he was IDL 3 for me, right behind Deion Walker. And he has not disappointed. And right now I'm looking at the middle of that interior defensive line for the Cardinals over the course of the entire season, and it's been pretty underwhelming. I think this is a team that can get a lot better against the run with the addition with someone like Kenneth Grant. Plus, with how athletic he is, you see flashes of the pass rush upside. I think there's a lot of room for him to continue to grow at the next level there. San Francisco 49ers, I continue to love this fit. Hey, if he's going to be there at 14, this defensive line's not as good as you think it is. And really, it's just kind of like Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, please win us this rep. And, right now, no Hargrave. So, it's Nick Bosa, please win us this rep. So, I'd love to get him some reinforcements, ton of bend, ton of get off here with James Pierce Jr. And, out of conference play wasn't great, but hey, step into SEC play, he starts making plays. Sign me up for that. That's a big enough sample. And honestly, conference play, when you play in the SEC, is enough to kind of double down and back up your preseason thoughts. Because a lot of people saw him as top 5, top 10 potential pick. He could go even higher. than what I have here at 14 if he keeps it up the rest of conference play. Then we get to the Los Angeles Chargers here at 15. Benjamin Morrison, just blew out his knee, so he's out for the rest of the year, unfortunately. But up until that injury, I thought he had a really solid season. Came into my year as my number 2 corner. I think the movement skills are still there. And right now, I look at that cornerback room for the Chargers in a very complex defense, albeit, I get it, Jesse Minter, they do a lot of different things, and they've simplified how they call it, but still, it's no walk in the park. And we'll see what happens with Cam Hart and the other corner from Maryland, whose name's now escaping me. 2 rookies they got from last year, but ultimately I think Morrison's the more talented guy than Cam Hart, former Notre Dame corner, teammates from last year. So I think Ben Morrison basically gives them that number 1 shutdown corner moving forward, and then they can kind of figure out the rest of that cornerback room. But I do think an overhaul is potentially needed there in that secondary, other than someone like a Derwin James. Let's get to the Dallas Cowboys here at 16. Easiest pick of the mock, Ashton Jeanty. I'm going to keep doing it. And, I've been wanting to get Jeanty in the top half of the first round, and we finally did it. So, Dallas, keep losing, because then you make my job as a mock drafter very easy. But I could also see him going a lot higher than this. Dude, right now, he's my pick to win the Heisman. He's just been insane as a runner, and they haven't even tapped into what he is as a pass catcher. Preseason, I was like, he has an MJD build with, Alvin Kamara balance. And ultimately, the more I watch him, it's just you know what that sounds like? It sounds like LaDainian Tomlinson. And I know that's high praise, future Hall of Famer and LaDainian Tomlinson, to put that as a comp here for Ashton Jeanty. I don't normally do comps, but you guys haven't even seen him as a pass catcher. But once you do, it's LaDainian Tomlinson, man. It is crazy how good this kid is, and would be a huge shot in the arm for that Dallas run game. Tampa Bay next up at 17. I'm going to go Mykel Williams. Very different style of edge rusher than what they currently have. I also think Zion McCollum breakout. He's had up and down games for sure, but you've seen that athleticism pop, and he's starting to make some headway. So I'm going to go away from corner. It's been something I've been mocking a ton of the Bucs. I'm going to go edge here. Very different body type than Yaya Diaby and Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. And even more versatile than someone like a Logan Hall. Hall at this point is an interior defensive guy. He's going to line up over the tackle or somewhere there inside. Mykel Williams, you could line up outside the tackle. You could play some 3-tech. You could even get crazy on pass downs and kind of have him as that shade nose, that one eye or something. Could do some cool stuff there. A lot of power, but unfortunately the injury has kind of skewed the sample size and how much we've gotten to see of him. Hopefully the rest of the stretch gives us enough to get a full vote of confidence in him as a first-round guy. But a really interesting kind of fit there with the Buccaneers. Pick number 18, I can hear you guys through your keyboards. Why the fuck has Kelvin Bank not gone off the board? Apologies for my language, but I understand. Because he's top 10 player on my board right now. He's awesome. And depending on what you think about Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks is the best tackle in the draft. Love him as a pass protector in specific. But every time I do these mocks, there's always one guy I'm talking about is I can't believe he fell this far, And this time it just ended up being Kelvin Banks. And most of the time we get through April and it's wow, that guy fell that far in the first round. That is a little puzzling. Hey, well, I'm not necessarily calling my shot and saying that's going to be Kelvin Banks, but I'm just trying to justify why there is typically a guy who in these mock drafts falls a little bit further than I would like. And then that I think, as a draft community, would like to see. But there's that. It's like that in April, too. So Kelvin Banks in this mock is the faller, and he falls right into the lap of the Philadelphia Eagles, who I think would throw a full-on, parade, as would essentially be their Lane Johnson replacement. And I know Jordan Mailata's banged up right now. I'm not really worried about that long-term, but I think you teach Banks to flip over to the right side. It's going to be a work in progress, but that's why you have him sit for a year behind one of my generation's best right tackles, maybe my generation's greatest left tackle. So have him sit behind Lane Johnson, a pro's pro, and let that be your tackle replacement of the future. If you're an Eagles fan, this is like the Howie Roseman way right here. So I feel like most Eagles fans get pumped up when I go trenches in these mocks. So hopefully this is one that fires you up. Let's get on to the Seattle Seahawks here at 19. I'm actually stay in the trenches, and we're going to stay at Texas. I'm going to go Cam Williams. Same pick as I had in my last mock, I do believe. But yeah, Abe Lucas, and definitely not a George fan at his age. But yeah, I think Abe Lucas, as much as I liked him out of Washington State, he's just not on the field enough. And also, I would argue that both those tackles, as much as I love Charles Cross too, the rookie year's been the peak for both those guys, unfortunately. We'll see where Cross goes the rest of the season. But that's a little disappointing. Cam Williams, only a one-year starter. A lot of penalties, still raw there, but you see movement skills, you see power, you see arm length. He checks all those boxes. So in a lot of ways where some people would be like, ooh, just a one-year starter, I'm not really interested in that. I feel like there's going to be a handful of NFL teams who are he's doing all this as a one-year starter. Yeah, sign me up for that. So it's kind of interesting how teams could look at the same, call it a data point, and one could be frightened by it, and the other one sees it as a point of encouragement. And I do think that's going to be an interesting conversation the rest of the way for Cam Williams. Indianapolis Colts here at 20. This one I'm going to have Malachi Starks come off the board, another guy that definitely could have gone higher than this. Like I said, thought about it for the Bengals. But with Blackman an impending free agent, I could definitely see them wanting to upgrade that position. No disrespect to Blackman, I think he's a fine starting safety. I think Starks brings some superstar potential there. And if Gus Bradley's going to be back running that cover 3, Malachi Starks is that free safety center fielder of the middle, sign me up for that. That would be must-watch TV right there with his range and athleticism, but also willingness to come in the box. He's kind of like the perfect last line of defense. Like, he's not, leaving you out to dry there. So I would just love to see his playmaking and ball, skills over the top in the middle of that, Colts defense. Feels like a really fun fit. Denver Broncos here at 21. I'm going to go Colston Loveland. I haven't done this yet in any of the mocks, so I wanted to do something a little different. Don't want to give you guys the same video. I also think, Adam Troutman, Lucas Kroll, you could probably get better than those guys. Colston Loveland, clear-cut tight end 1 for me. Improving as a blocker, and right now he's being left out to dry when it comes to pass-catching production. This is definitely going to be the guy that, I'm consistently saying, do not look at the stats. Have you seen Michigan's quarterback play this year? Don't worry about his stats. Watch the tape. He's getting open consistently. When he's given the opportunity to catch the ball and it's an accurate pass, he is very reliable there. He's an improving blocker. So kind of an interesting idea. I'm really kind of up in the air about what this team does at receiver. So because of that, I'm going to hedge and go tight end instead for the Broncos. Atlanta Falcons here at 22. Sticking with the Michigan Wolverines, I'm going to go with Josiah Stewart. He's PFF's highest graded edge rusher, highest rated pass rush grade at the college level for Power 4 at least. And he's got easily the best pass rush win rate by nearly 8 percentage points. So 8 percentage points. So pretty crazy stuff there. We've been saying for years now as a draft community, the Falcons have got to draft edge. This is the year it happens. Josiah Stewart would be one hell of an addition for Raheem Morris. Chicago Bears at 23. I know the year has been a little disappointing for Deion Walker, but I still, there's still flashes there, and ultimately size, speed freak. And because of that, he's going to go somewhere in the first round. I don't think Gervon Dexter's been bad, but I also think that Deion Walker could just be the first round version of Gervon Dexter. And that, Matty Before that 3-tech spot is massive for his scheme. It was DeForest Buckner in Indy. And ever since then, I've been kind of waiting for them to make that move. I thought, Jalen Carter could be that guy. Byron Murphy the second last year's draft. Maybe that's the guy. Instead, it's been kind of Gervon Dexter, and they're kind of trying to make that work. Like I said, I think Deion Walker is just almost the first-round version of that style of player and that type of disruptor, especially with what he is still doing as a pass rusher. Sign me up for that as a Bears fan. We're going to go edge and then interior offensive line. Bears fans, don't worry. I'm going to give you some interior offensive linemen. Speaking of interior offensive linemen, pretty easy one here. It's going to be Tyler Booker to the Baltimore Ravens. I think that's your plug-and-play starter over Daniel Falele, who hasn't been, horrible. But I definitely think it's an upgradable spot. And I do think, this is an interior offensive line class that can get one guy in the first round. And to me right now, I think Tyler Booker is probably the guy who's playing the best. So I think the Ravens offensive line, like I said preseason, I think the hate was overblown. I think this team has figured it out. And part of that is Lamar, for sure. And part of it's Todd Monken, for sure. But I think, they're playing well above what people's expectations were, especially after week 1 against the Chiefs. It's almost like Chris Jones is an absolute game wrecker and can do that against anybody he wants to. But let's go ahead and get him a little bit more reinforcements, because I do think Falele been fine, but a potential upgradable spot. And I think Booker's a really good player. To the Buffalo Bills here at 25, sticking interior offensive line. I like Josiah Torrance coming out of Florida, but I'm not seeing it. And this is typically more of a zone scheme. To me, Torrance was more of a gap fit, so Jonas Seven, I think, is probably a better fit there. Again, we'll get a feel for weight and arm length. Maybe he does end up playing tackle, but for right now, they have an interior offensive line here on Mock Draft Database. I'm fine with that, because then ultimately it makes it a little bit of an easier fit here for the Buffalo Bills. They also did give an extension to Spencer Brown, so this would definitely be more, hey, this is your Josiah Torrance replacement at right guard. So that's going to be the pick here at 25. To the Washington Commanders, I'm going to keep doing it, like Siobhan Ravel, or Revel, I've heard both, but I'm going to go with Ravel Jr. But size, speed, freak, and I don't think there was a game on his schedule this year that was going to change your mind about how you felt about him. If you thought, hey, the tape's good last year, but it's against nobodies, you were going to say the same thing at the end of this process. And if you saw the tape last year and you're like, who's this freaky athlete with insane ball skills? Get him on my roster. You were going to probably say the same thing at the end of this year. I don't think there was going to be any narrative change there about Siobhan Ravel. So I'm going to still be in the first round, just like Benjamin Morrison. I'm not really worried about these injuries for freak athletes, for guys who the tape checks out and they're first round guys, especially knee injuries where we're seeing guys come back from that better and better all the time, year over year. So Siobhan Rebel for a defense that definitely needs to overhaul that secondary. Mike Samerstill's been a really good, solid, Band-Aid fix there at outside corner. But to me, that's a nickel guy. Quan Martin becomes your Cam Curl replacement. Siobhan Rebel outside. Yeah, that to me sounds a whole lot more what this long-term should be for that Washington secondary. On the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm going to give them Bond, Isaiah Bond. Sorry, I had to as a James Bond fan. But, I don't know what Roman Wilson did. I don't know what dirt he has on Mike Tomlin or vice versa for this man to not get on the field. But and I know Sunday night was a game a lot of Steelers fans are excited about. Ultimately, the Steelers did a whole lot of picking on Jalen Mills and Brandon Eccles, and I applaud them for picking on two guys that I swear had retired about a year ago. And also no Michael Carter II. But all that to say, I think in that game it showed, hey, the Steelers are getting separation against guys who were very much on the fringe of being on the roster. I think it could change and look a little different as soon as Monday night, even against the Giants, who I don't think those corners are godly, but like they're starting players versus like fringe roster guys. But other than that one game, and don't tell me Russell Wilson made these guys open, because they was still contested catch balls that ultimately these guys were making, and I'm just not going to have that conversation with y'all. But I think this team needs a spark outside playmaker, someone who you just put the ball in their hands and it makes everything so much easier. And George Pickens does a lot of things good, but separator, yards after the catch guy, I wouldn't really call him that. He's more of that 50-50 contested catch guy who can also catch a slant because the DB's playing off, and then he's a good enough athlete to kind of go from there. But like true make a guy miss one-on-one, bubble screen, that type of yak skills, Isaiah Bond, much more of that. And again, like I said in my last mock, like I know this feels like a lot of the same archetype that they just drafted with Roman Wilson, but at the same time, my man just cannot get on the field and he cannot stop getting hurt. So if we can get a first-round version of that same player, it might go a long way. Obviously, we don't know what quarterback's going to be. I could see where they go to Fields next year. That's TBD for sure. So again, let's get in the offseason. Let's figure that out. But to get a true separator and a true spark plug type of guy on the outside with George Pickens, I think is a really nice compliment. It makes that offense a lot more explosive as a whole. Green Bay Packers, next up at 28. I think Tacario Davis is a great fit for this man-based defense, and I do think outside corner, Nixon, Stokes, neither one of them really wows me. Tacario Davis, to me, would be a sizable upgrade of that long-term. Maybe not right away, but like by years 2 and 3, I think Tacario Davis is probably a better player than those guys. And also just like really interesting body type, 6'4", going to be a guy who runs 4.4 or lower, really twitchy athlete. And right now, much more comfortable playing press man. So I think he's a really nice fit opposite of Jair Alexander, upgrading on some of those other outside corners currently playing for the Pack. All right, let me get to the Houston Texans. We got a nice little run of new players to be talked about. Actually, the guy I'm talking about here in a second, not necessarily the guy that's new to the first round conversation, but he did get a little bit of a bump up for me. But we're going to have Derek Harmon be the pick here for the Houston Texans. I mean, a lot of mocks last draft cycle for me included, Houston going IDL, trying to get that pass rush type. A lot of them were Braden Fisk, because I think they already have guys on the roster who are good enough run defenders. The PFF grades may not back that up, but I think if like push came to shove, need a stop here on 3rd and short, those guys would probably be who you play on a run stop situation, and they have been guys who can do that at an okay level. Derek Harmon might be a little light to be like a high level run defender. He's got good PFF grades doing that, but I think at college it's a little easier for these lighter interior defensive linemen to shoot gaps and just be quicker than the dude across from him, because that dude's not going to play on Sundays. Don't know if that's going to be the case at the NFL level, but that being said, what I do know is this guy's super light, very quick on his feet, and got a great moveset. And this guy has just kind of came out of nowhere to me as a pass rusher. Wasn't really someone on my radar. You hear Broshmo talking about him. Shout out to Broshmo. And I'm like, all right, I'll give him a watch. I'll give it a look. And then next thing you know, the name starts populating elsewhere. I start seeing it on Twitter more, and it's in a PFF show talking about it. I'm like, all right, cool, sweet. And week over week, I just find myself getting more and more impressed with Derek Harmon as a pass rusher. So for a team that already has a couple of run stoppers on that interior defensive line, and honestly, you can just kind of find those guys for pretty cheap in free agency. Let's go get him an interior disruptor and a pass rusher. And Derek Harmon, man, he's had a hell of a season at Oregon. Wanted to give him some flowers for his rise up the draft board. Minnesota Vikings, I'm going to go Jahdae Barron here. Again, he's been in a first-round mock for me, but it was like at pick 32, so slight bump here. But this team has, Gilmore hitting free agency, Byron Murphy II hitting free agency, among other guys. So Barron having a hell of a year at outside corner right now for Texas, but has also played safety. He's also played slot. So with all this turnover right now for Minnesota in the secondary, I like Jahdae Barron as a kind of a one-size-fits-all. Whatever ends up happening in free agency, Jahdae Barron can also fit somewhere in that equation to become a day one starter for the secondary. That I like the guys they have, but I also think they can get better long-term. And I think Jahdae Barron, like I said, an awesome season in Texas. This would be a really nice fit in that Brian Flores defense. To the Detroit Lions, man, I'm excited to talk about this one. I'm going to go Kyle Kennard. Haven't had him in my mocks. Finally got around to checking him out. And some games is a little underwhelming, but then in some games, like the power and the length are on full display. And I tell you what, you always see the motor. This dude never gives up on a play. And stylistically, I don't know if he's a total like perfect complement to like Aiden Hutchinson. I think in grand scheme of things, Hutchinson's 6-spin move, Kennard is probably going to win with power and length. It's a good enough complement. But what I do like is having two edge rushers who just don't know how to quit. Who like legitimately, if you told them to stop, they would just refuse. So I kind of like that a ton. And just like these high effort, high motor guys screaming towards the quarterback, making that secondary that much better. Yeah, sign me up for that. And I think Kennard, man, like I don't know fully first round, but I wanted to give him some love here. I think there's a chance, like late 1, early 2 could potentially be the ceiling here for Kyle Kennard as he continues to rise up a lot of people's draft boards. Kansas City Chiefs, another guy that I think should be climbing up people's draft boards. He's been an awesome right tackle so far this year for Oregon. Agenai Cornelius. I like him in the run game. I like him as a pass protector. He's really light on his feet. The hand placement's been solid. Enough anchor, kind of play strength to anchor. Yeah, I like Agenai Cornelius. And I mean, ultimately they could flip Kingsley Suamataia over to right tackle. He played both spots at BYU, and that could be your way to get on from underneath that Jawan Taylor contract. But I do think that's a player they would like to move on from. And I'd almost just rather let Suamataia and Morris battle it out. Worst comes to worst, Kingsley Suamataia just became the second round swing tackle that can play on either side. And if you're the Kansas City Chiefs, to me, there's like 2 things that could derail your season. 3. Let's get the one out of the way. Patrick Mahomes injury. Like, duh. Okay, that aside. Massive injury run on the secondary. Like, if this team just becomes depleted and looks like the Jets on Sunday Night Football, that could be a problem. Or if this team has, like, an insane injury run on offensive linemen, and then you're trotting out dudes who retired 2 years ago or guys who were playing in the XFL a season ago, like, that's where it could become like, okay, the Chiefs are in major trouble here. So I almost just, like, I'm fine with, like, yeah, Wanya Morris is the 3rd rounder, Suamataia is the 2nd rounder, Cornelius here in the 1st round. We're just going to have options all across the board. Tackle's not going to kill us if we're the Kansas City Chiefs. But also, like I said, Cornelius is having an awesome year at Oregon. I think he deserves some 1st-round love. All right, let's get on to the 2nd-round mix. As promised, we're going to go edge for the Chicago Bears. I think they can improve upon from DeMarcus Walker. Jack Sawyer, been really impressive this year. High-level run defender. Got the size, got the athleticism, a lot of power in his profile to become a nice pass rusher at the next level. Really like him opposite of Montez Sweat. Getting a little bit of an offensive tackle run here. Wyatt Milam's going to be the pick for the Cleveland Browns. Jedrick Wills, I would assume they're going to let him walk. That hasn't been, worth the 1st-round pick. Wyatt Milam, low-key been maybe the best left tackle in college football this year. Like, I mean, I know Will Campbell and Kelvin Banks still exist, but like, don't sleep. Wyatt Milam is putting himself in that conversation, and he may put himself into a 1st-round conversation. I think the guy for the Titans here in a couple of picks was going to do the exact same thing. Same thing, honestly, the next guy I'm going to have come off the board here, too, is starting to pick it up, too. So, Wyatt Milam, got to give him a shout here. If you haven't watched West Virginia, they got a good game this upcoming weekend, so definitely get your eyes on the Mountaineers. I think you'll be really impressed with Wyatt Milam. Like I said, Ariante Ursary, maybe the first couple games were a little underwhelming. That's kind of when I was like, all right, this isn't going to be the year. Maybe he goes back. But honestly, since like week 2, he's been rock solid, and size, strength is there. Kind of fits that old school gap, scheme that New England has typically run. We'll see what they decide to do going into year 2 of Gerard Mayo. But like, I could totally see them being like, yes, this is like the left tackle that when you think about the New England Patriots, this dude looks the part. Yeah, absolutely been really impressed. Week 3 on with Ursary, and if you've watched the Patriots this year, offensive line's a major issue. Then we get to the Tennessee Titans. I'm going to have Josh Simmons come off the board. Again, like, I know he just blew out his knee, but like, the tape was checking out. He's super nimble on his feet. He's a great run blocker. Like, I just don't know what Bill Callahan wouldn't want to work with here. J.C. Latham, I think it's coming along there at left tackle, but he also played right tackle in college. So, like, I don't see the issue in making him flip. Or if you're really like, hey, Latham just spent a full year at the NFL, let's keep him at left tackle. You just made Latham flip from one side to the other. What's stopping you from doing the same exact thing with Josh Simmons? So, like, no matter what argument throw at me here, I feel like there's a way to make this work. And at the end of the day, you're getting a dude who's uber talented, being coached by one of the 4 greatest offensive line coaches of NFL, history in Bill Callahan. So, talented guy with an insanely high, pedigree coach. Yeah, sign me up for that. And at this point, Nicholas Petit-Frere just is not going to cut it. So we're replacing one Buckeye tackle with another. New Orleans Saints are next up. I'm going to go to the safety position. I do think opposite of Tyrann Mathieu, this team can get a little bit better. And Nick Manowari, not much on this field that this guy can't do. High-level tackler, can come down in the box, cover tight ends, cover slots. He can play over the top, got plenty of speed there. I think he's going to be a solid tester at the combine. And if not for Kevin Winston Jr. getting hurt, to me, Kevin Winston Jr. would still be my safety too. He still probably is because I still trust my evaluation from what I saw last year and the little we got to see this year. Actually, no, hurt preseason. So from what I saw last year. But Eman Wari is going to make that a little bit of a tighter race than I would have anticipated if you asked me 3 months ago, because he's been that impressive, kind of a do-it-all guy. And I think opposite of Tyrann Mathieu, it just gives you two dudes who, on a given play, could both start up at the top of the formation. You give a too high look, and an offense can be okay, I think they're going to rotate one of those guys, but which one? And these are the types of questions you just want to force an offense to ask, force a quarterback to think that much longer about that versus whatever else maybe happened at or across the defensive line, or just force him to spend a quarter of a second processing and seeing someone come down as that pass rush is coming your way. So, I love the versatility that him and Matthew would have there on the back end for the New Orleans Saints. Let's get on the Jacksonville Jaguars here. Like I said, we're going to go interior defensive line. Walter Nolan, he's looking like that 5-star prospect he was coming out of high school and when he committed to A&M. Been an awesome run defender, but you're seeing the juice and athleticism as a pass rusher too. So I like the run stopping, honestly, most with this fit next to Eric Armstead, who can play inside and out, and same thing with Trayvon Walker. But I also think there's some juice and some upside for him as a pass rusher, depending on what happens with Armstead, how long he's there in Jacksonville. So it's kind of a one-size-fits-all. It kind of does a lot of different things for this Jags team that I think they could use on that interior defensive line. Here we go, pick 39-40. This is again where I was going to have Milroe and Beck go because I think the last couple of weeks this is about where they should go. But ultimately, QB tax kind of pushed them up the board. Vegas Raiders, I'm going to give them Emeka Egbuka. Obviously, a lot of question marks about what that receiving room looks like long term. I don't think it's going to be headlined by DJ Turner and Trey Tucker. So Jacoby Myers he's probably going to work his way out of there and go try to get a ring, compete for a contender. So, Emeka Egbuka, he's a slot guy for sure, but love him as a separator. Also, a really solid blocker there from the slot, so I can see where Antonio Pierce is all in on that type of guy. He's a player's player for sure. Then we get to the Giants at 40. I'm going to go with Emory Jones Jr. Either way you spin it, whether he's a guard or a tackle, I think you can improve upon Jermaine Illuminor long term. Maybe you just let him sit behind Illuminor in that second year of a contract. Or he plays guard, and he's absolutely an upgrade over Greg Van Roten long term. So, either way you spin it, that right side of the offensive line needs a guy. I think Emory Jones here at 40 is good value. It's been a step back this year, unfortunately, but I still believe in the upside. And honestly, their offensive line coach, whose name's now escaping me, but he came over from the Raiders and turned around a lot of dudes, including Jermaine Illuminor, that I thought had Andre James, another name, who while he was there, those guys were playing better than I ever thought they had the business of playing. So get Emory Jones into his hands and let's see what can happen. All right, Jets here at 41. Going to get him a pass catcher now. Let's go Trey Harris. Play him on the outside. Field stretching. Big play guy. Nice compliment. He's not the same type of receiver that Devontae Adams is, assuming DA is still there. He's not the same type of receiver that Garrett Wilson is. And honestly, Garrett Wilson at this point, let's play him in the slot. I think that's the best place for him. You could have him and Devontae both kind of interchange there, but Trey Harris, that would be your kind of sacrificial guy on the outside. Devontae would play the X unless you need him to play inside, and then you would just let Harris do that. So, just like the compliment, and his deep speed is going to open up intermediate stuff for DA, intermediate underneath stuff for Garrett Wilson. So just kind of a nice fit, and I think round out that receiver room. Carolina Panthers here at 42. This team desperately needs some an injection of talent there at the edge position. And Donovan Ezeraki, who's been rock solid this year, both as a run defender and as a pass rusher for BC. 6'2", 247, super long arms. I think this is a great building block for the Panthers to try to overhaul that defensive line, other than, of course, Derek Brown, who's out for this year. Miami Dolphins here at pick number 43. This is where mocks are tough sometimes because, QB rankings, Ewers has been really disappointing the last 2 weeks. I'd still probably have him one spot ahead of Nussmeier just because arm talent, mobility. But that said, Garrett Nussmeier's been nails this season for the most part. There's been some moments where you're ooh, did he really? But he's also, for a guy who doesn't play a whole lot of college football, you're going to get some of that, And, over the last 2 weeks, Nussmeier's been the better guy than Ewers. And specifically for a fit in this offense, and that's where it's tough. My rankings are not based around, the Miami Dolphins offense in mind. It's just, what I generally think about the position and what I would want. Nussmeier, man, he's got some Tony Romo in him, man. Throws with anticipation, good touch, really accurate guy, willing to take chances, a better arm than Romo, but still kind of all in the same vein. And I know Tua's coming back, and I know they gave that extension to Tua. But if he's not going to wear the Guardian cap, I'm having a hard time thinking that eventually it's not going to happen. Maybe it's another year between, just kind of like last year. But I do think eventually it might become something that we're talking about again. And ultimately, like Tim Boyle, not cutting it. Snoop Huntley wasn't cutting it. So like worst comes to worst, Garrett Nussmeier's your backup, learns from Tua, learns the system, and in the event that he misses time, your season's not derailed and you're not 2-4 looking to make an insane comeback to make a playoff run. So Dolphins fans, let me know. But I also think his play style is a perfect fit for what they're trying to do. So like again, Tua is a huge TBD right now. Garrett Nussmeier would be one hell of an interesting replacement option / backup option for that scheme. Arizona Cardinals here at 44. I think that interior offensive line could use an upgrade, especially now Will Hernandez. I believe he's on the last year of that deal. They may have given an extension. That sounds kind of familiar now that I say it. But he's out for the rest of the year. I think the other guys in that interior offensive line unit are nothing to write home about. Tate Ratledge, rock solid, especially as a pass protector. Like him a ton. And for Kyler Murray, shorter quarterback, I want to get 3 awesome pass protectors there on the interior. I think Tate Ratledge is a step in that direction. 49ers next up here at 45. I've given them guards. I've given them tackles. Want to do something a little different here. Let's go center. Jake Brendel's been fine, but like you could also upgrade that spot. And Parker's Brailford, a little bit light. We'll see if he decides to get back to school. He's been okay this year. Not necessarily like wowing me as like clear-cut number 1 center in this class, but still time for him to kind of pick that up the rest of the way. He's going to need to bulk up to at least get to 290, 295 to like ease the concerns about his playing weight. But his movement skills would be a tailor-made fit for that wide zone scheme and the wide zone stuff that Shanahan wants to run. So like cheaper, younger, 4 years of control, like that sounds kind of alluring there at that center spot for that 49ers O-line. All right, Cincinnati Bengals are next up, and we're going to go Tyreek Williams, as promised. Back to the defensive line. I think the movement skills are pretty solid. I know for some people he's a little sluggish, but I also think like when he sees the window of opportunity to strike as a pass rusher, he's quick. Like when he's decisive. I guess that's mostly what I'm trying to say here. He may not always be the quickest guy, but when he sees an opening, he seizes it. And he's also a rock solid run defender. Big guy, eats up a lot of space. So I like that in that middle of the defensive line. So another year where we're giving the Bengals a second round D tackle. But I actually do think Williams plus Chris Jenkins, that would shore up that run defense a lot. Cowboys are next up here at 47. I'm going to go to Jaden Higgins. Just been really, really impressive this year for Iowa State. And I've been normally giving them like a designated deep threat Brandon Cooks replacement. But I also think like this team needs a sacrificial X. I think Higgins is exactly that. You play Tolbert at the Y. CD is your slot. You can move him outside too, but like he's your Z or your Y basically on a given play. You're either playing him in the slot or you're still playing him outside, but off the line of scrimmage. And I think Tolbert's probably best suited in that same sort of role, like off the line of scrimmage, not seeing press, considering he's not as big as I thought he was coming out of South Bama. Or, that they had him listed at, I should say. So Jaden Higgins, I think, is your sacrificial X, contested catch, red zone guy, and he's been awesome at doing all that this year for Iowa State. Chargers next up at 48. You got the last year of a deal for Khalil Mack, and then you have a very cuttable contract for Joey Bosa, albeit, I know he's had a better season this year. But I do think edge is a spot where they could be looking. I know this says D-line, but I promise you, LT Overton is an edge rusher. And he's also a very different edge rusher than Tuli Tuipulotu, and I do wonder if this is the year where they do turn the card and move on from Backmosa. That's an interesting amalgamation of those new names, but Mack and Bosa, and free up that cap space to be used elsewhere, primarily on the offensive side, getting some pass catchers for Justin Herbert, and LT Overton makes it that much easier to move on from those guys. Pick 49, going to go to the interior offensive line and Donovan Jackson. I think Cody Mock's coming along there at right guard. So like Donovan Jackson, his movement skills, former 5-star recruit, and that Liam Cohen wide zone, it's McVay. It's a zone-based offense with some gap in there. That's not to say that there's no gap, but I also think Jackson's got the play strength to play in a gap scheme. I'd be fine with that. So he's got a scheme agnostic. I'm fine with either way. But yeah, Donovan Jackson there at left guard. You go into year 2 of Grant Barton. Cody Mock going into year 3, starting to figure some things out in year 2. All of a sudden, I'm feeling really good about that interior offensive line. And of course, this would be a huge smile on the face of Rashad White, Bucky Irving, and Sean Tucker. But as long as those 3 guys are teammates, fantasy owners will not be smiling. But they will like the improvement at the offensive line, though, that's for sure. Philadelphia Eagles, next up here at 50. I've made this pick a handful of times, so I won't drone on too long. Landon Jackson, I just think this is your Brandon Graham replacement. Long arm, plays with a ton of power, high-level run defender. To me, it's like match for match. This is your perfect opportunity to move on from Brandon Graham. Indianapolis Colts are next up, and I'm going to give him TJ Sanders. I've said this a couple times. I do think Grover Stewart could be a cut candidate next training camp. TJ Sanders, maybe again, the last 2 weeks haven't been as gaudy as they were to start the season, but high-level run defender with a ton of first-step juice to be a pretty nice functioning pass rusher from the inside. And I think partnering him up with DeForest Buckner is a good mentor-mentee relationship for TJ Sanders. Let's get to the Denver Broncos next up at 52. Obviously, prayers up for Josh Reynolds. Super scary news that broke earlier today. But I could see them moving on from Cortland Sutton. I think Reynolds was a one-year deal, if my memory serves. So a lot of kind of question marks about that team's receiver room going into next year. And I almost just wonder if Kyron Lacy could just be almost that Josh Reynolds perfect replacement. The 40 is going to determine where Lacy goes in the draft, but like 6'2", 215, if he runs like 4'5", anything less than like 4.55, I think he's good, and he'll probably go somewhere here in the second round. Just rock solid, good intermediate route runner, reliable hands, can work the sideline too. I just think this is your X receiver right here in Denver at pick 52. On to pick 53. Let's give the Atlanta Falcons a corner and Jabbar Muhammad. I feel like I'm working through some therapy here. I've been wanting the Falcons to add that corner and edge room the last couple of years, and that's what I'm doing here in this mock. But Jabbar Muhammad, his movement skills and honestly his fluidity and zone coverage, to me, is why I made this fit. I feel like he'd be, in a defense that wants to play a lot of cover 4, a lot of cover 3. Jabbar Muhammad, to me, stands out as a really nice complement to A.J. Terrell on the other side and a really good scheme fit for Raheem Morris. Back to the Seattle Seahawks. I'm going to go Luke Kandra. Honestly, these next two picks could be totally flipped. I'm fine with either one of that. I just think between the Seattle Seahawks and Chicago Bears, both of them need interior offensive line. So Luke Kandra, rock solid grades last year at Cincy. He had a really good tape too coming into the season. It's been more of the same for him at Cincinnati. He's got slightly better grades than the guy I'm going to have go here at 55. But he also comes from a small school. So again, you could easily trade Luke Kandra and Jaden Roberts, who's going to be the pick here for the Bears. But for the Bears here, this is tailor-made. You're getting a power 4 guy that plays right guard. I think that offensive line's gotten a little bit better with Pryor there at right guard, which is just to say how disastrous Nate Davis was. But I think Jaden Roberts can give you even more out of that position on that offensive line. And going into year 2, Caleb Williams, let's make sure we're doing good by that first overall pick investment that we made with Caleb. All right, to the Baltimore Ravens and pick 56. This is just kind of the rich getting richer. And I'm not going to be the guy to tell Derrick Henry he's like getting old and losing tread on the tires, because have you seen the man this year? I mean, especially in the fourth quarter, he just gets one gallop for like 80 yards plus a week. So he's still got like long speed, and he's battling through contact. And right now they're not using him as like a soul. Like he gets every touch out of the backfield. They're mixing up well between him and Justice Hill. That being said, could you imagine flipping out Justice Hill for Quinton Judkins? That could be a really fun watch. They also have Rasheen Ali, who I liked a ton and got hurt at the Senior Bowl. And if not for that, I think he would have been like a draft community favorite running back. So they don't have to go running back here, but the value was too good. Want to make sure Judkins went somewhere here in the first 64. And it's kind of a fun idea to partner him up with Lamar and Derrick Henry in that backfield. Could be #fun to watch. To the Washington Commanders, thought about edge rusher here, but again, just trying to do some different things. I've done corner edge in a lot of these mocks. So let's go receiver, and I'm not counting out Luke McCaffrey. I'm kind of intrigued by him as a power slot. But that being said, I'm going to go with Xavier Restrepo. I've been looking for a way to get him in some of these mocks because he's been that good at Miami, man. Just like a pure separator. This is a tried and true NFL slot receiver here. Like the makeup, the separation skills, the 3 cones can be legit. And then also what he does after the catch. He's been awesome after the catch. And some of that's Cam Ward's like escaping the pocket, making big plays. He's got a lot of space, but Restrepo's doing a lot of it on his own as well. So I love his feel against zone coverage, but again, the shiftiness to beat man, yeah, you name it, he can do it. And I do think this is a team that could use one more guy, especially in the structure of the offense where like Jane Daniels throws as pretty a go ball as you're going to see. And De'Ami Brown, that's the name of his game. And Terry McLaurin can do anything you want him to. But at the same time, when you have a guy throwing perfect go balls, do you want to take Terry McLaurin out of that mix? Probably not. So I almost wonder if those guys continue to work the vertical route tree. That's what Jaden does best. And then Restrepo is just kind of your release, your underneath, eat up space, beat zone coverage, fill in those soft spots, that type of guy. Feels like he kind of rounds out that room. Again, not that those guys can't, specifically Terry McLaurin. I just think he frees up those guys to continue to be pretty much nonstop vertical guys. Pittsburgh Steelers next up. I'm going to go with Jason Marshall Jr. He's been a guy on my radar for the last couple of years. He's been in my preseason way too early, corner rankings. But this feels like the first year where the play matches up the size, speed profile. Because like you look at him, you're like, oh God, NFL man coverage corner right there. But the play just hasn't really lived up to that. But this year at Florida, I think he's finally getting there. And he's been a part of the reason why Florida's kind of turned around post that Miami disastrous, week 0 loss. So Dante Jackson going to become a free agent this year for the Steelers. Love the idea of Jason Marshall Jr., Joey Porter Jr. pairing up as like a man coverage specialist outside corners. I mean, they're still going to run a lot of zone, and I think Marshall's athleticism is going to make him play just fine in that. But the idea of like 3rd and 10 man press, him and JPJ, whew, that puts legitimate goosebumps on my arm. All right, pick 59. I'm going to give the Green Bay Packers a replacement to Josh Myers, who to me, like, clearly the weak link on that offensive line. I know you're going to see Logan Jones, 271. What is TJ talking about here? He'll be rising, I promise. Another year where we're talking about one of these offensive linemen from Iowa with insane play strength, wicked grip strength, and Logan Jones can move, man. He can get out and move. So he fits that zone scheme that Matt LaFleur wants to run, and the body positioning, leverage battle, like you name it. He's got that wrestling back, like just another one of these guys from Iowa, man. He's just another one. This time doing it at center, though, which is fun to talk about. I haven't been able to do that since Tyler Linderbaum. But that being said, not going to say he's going to be as good as Tyler Linderbaum. I do think he is a potential upgrade over Josh Myers, which, again, to me, been the weak link on that Packers O-line. All right, to the Buffalo Bills. We got 2 picks in the next 3 for them. I'm going to go with Shamar Stewart. He's listed as a defensive lineman. He plays edge, but he's like 6'4", 290, so you got some flexibility. And that's ultimately kind of what drew me to this. For a team that I think could use another interior defensive lineman as a pass rusher. Also, like Von Miller, let's just say he's not there in Buffalo next year. They could use another edge rusher in the mix. On top of it, AJ Epineza and Greg Rousseau. So I almost think Shamar Stewart could be kind of like one size fits all. He plays some edge, he plays some interior defensive line. You just get him in that rotation generally, and he as a whole makes that defensive line better in both those areas. So I like that fit a good bit. Then we get to the Houston Texans again here at 61. That interior offensive line is needing some work, and ultimately, like Kenyon Green, it was a different regime who drafted him. Let's just leave it at that. But it's looking like he was a potential bust there at pick 15 overall. I also will say, like, to me, he was always a gap scheme guy. So, like, get that guy in Baltimore, get that guy in New York for the Giants. You know, something like that would work a lot better than I think the Bobby Slowick wide zone, Shanahan disciple stuff. But Dylan Fairchild might fall into the same thing. We'll see once we get to the combine. Might be a little bit more gap than zone, but I want to get some athletic testing before I can totally confirm that. And in that case, we'll go in a different direction here. What I love is like an 86 PFF pass blocking grade. Like that's what I'm looking for. Like, especially after last week, it's just like, dude, can we give a clean pocket to CJ Stroud? Can we just give this man a clean pocket? So I think Dylan Fairchild, a step in the right direction there at that left guard spot, and might ease the avenue in which you can move on from Kenyon Green. Back to the Buffalo Bills. I'm going to go back to Tommy Hill. I had this pick in my last mock, but Rasul Douglas getting up there in age. I love Tommy Hill's feel for zone coverage. To me, he feels like a really nice replacement for Rasul Douglas in a zone-heavy Buffalo defense. 2 more picks. Detroit Lions. I think we're all seeing the impact that Tim Patrick can make for this offense. Now imagine a younger version of that, and that you have for cheap for 4 years for a team that's paying Jared Goff $50+ million a year. I think that's, and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Aiden Hutchinson soon, and all these other guys. I think I like Aiden Manning for a cheap price point. Sounds pretty alluring, especially if he's just going to play that Tim Patrick role, which is what I'm proposing here. And especially now, James Williams, another suspension. Don't know if that's going to be anything. Who's to say he gets another suspension? But at this point, it's just like, kind of feels like there's always something. So one more receiver feels like a nice little insurance policy for one of the league's best offenses. And actually stay at the receiver spot. And a similar yet different player. I'm going to give the Kansas City Chiefs Torrey Horton. To me, he's just a very different archetype than the 2 receivers I know they're going to have next year, and Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice. Suspension pending, of course. And go Yankees, by the way. I'm a Yankees fan. Pulling for the Yankees for sure. This World Series, we're going to get 28. Count it. Knock on wood. But like Torrey Horton there is a very different outside base receiver. It's a nice compliment for Rashee Rice, who's going to play inside. And I think, especially given his weight, Xavier Worthy's probably better off the line of scrimmage as that Y or that Z playing on the inside. So, guys, that's going to do it for my updated 2-round mock draft. I'm letting you see each and every pick one more time. Let me hear your thoughts down below. Who went too high? Who went too low? Who's your favorite team? And did you like the picks that I gave your squad? And if not, let me hear who you would be targeting. Who are some of the guys that you would really love to see your favorite team key in on and draft next April? I'd love to hear those thoughts down below in the comment section. Also, feel free to throw out some names. If you feel like I'm sleeping on someone, I'd love to hear some prospects I should get to grinding the tape on. I'm always looking for some new names to start watching. That's what I do during my work breaks at lunch. I'm just a true sicko there. So give me some names to watch. I'll make it happen. But guys, that's going to do it for me. Let me know your thoughts on this mock draft down below in the comment section. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Teej, and I am signing off.